Hi, everyone. So we are super happy to get this panel today. So let's get started. Maybe we do a quick round of intro, so you guys can describe a little bit what you do and what your company does.
Okay, so should I start?
Yes, go.
Hi everyone, my name is Henri Lieuteau. I work at the Starknet Foundation. So Starknet is a layer 2 that settles on Ethereum and Bitcoin, and I'm the head of ecosystem. So I help people who are onboarding the ecosystem, both on the DevRel side and on the early funding stage for up-and-coming companies.
Hello, I am Grigore Roșu. I'm the founder and CEO of Pi Squared, where we develop a verifiable settlement layer where you can settle anything that is provably true at the speed of light, instantaneous settlement. And in that process, we also develop ZK proofs universally for all programming languages, correct by construction, without translating to any particular VM.
So I'm DC Builder. I'm a research engineer at World, where World is building the largest financial identity network. And I mostly work on applied cryptography and decentralizing the architecture that we're working on. And yeah, very excited to be on the panel to talk about infrastructure with you guys.
My name is Martin. I'm leading the developer relations team at Ava Labs, which is the labs company of the Avalanche blockchain. Super excited to be here and yeah, talk about a little bit of it, about Infra and interop.
Yeah, cool. And then, and I'm a DevRel engineer at Wormhole. So Wormhole is an interoperability protocol, and I take care of everything that is developer related, from integration chat and doc and product and so on. All right, let's start with a high-level question. So today the Web3 infrastructure is maturing, so we're getting into like better tools and infra every day. So from your perspective, and based on whatever you guys are building, how far are we from developer being able to build Web3 application today with the same confidence that they would do in a regular web space? Like, what do you think is either in your protocol or in general?
Yeah, I think in general things are terrible. We're so used to eating shit that we don't even notice it, and I think we're very far away from anything having being usable by any kind of non-Web3 engineer. The problem in building a Web3 app is that you still have to have a lot of knowledge about Web3. Once we start having toolkits that abstract that away and focus on usable kits, we'll have more people coming from the outside, and I think that will come with time, because people will know the use cases that are useful, and they will believe that the toolkits that are used are safe, which is a concern today.
Yeah, jump on it.
I have a similar opinion, right? Like the problem is also like the fact that in Web 2 there's no value at stake. Usually when you're building an application, it's just like maybe your server gets hacked and like a database gets leaked, but there's no like financial loss. The nature of all Web 3 applications is that there's money at stake, and like a simple error of like an integer overflowing in a smart contract can cause you to lose millions of dollars if like anyone uses your app like with more usage. So it's like really hard to build secure applications still today in that regard. So Web 2 developers are kind of scared of that. Like they don't want to have the liability because they're used to having legal liability in the real world. But in crypto, we're like in this no man's land where like, okay, if I build a smart contract gets exploited, it's still kind of not my fault as the developer, but like it's always like bad on the user, right? Like nobody wants to lose money. So hopefully once there's like better compilers, better everything, like all these tools, as you mentioned, are there, then hopefully in a few years' time, the confidence will be there. But it's also a new paradigm where money is imbued in every application. If you're building a crypto application where there's no value involved, I would say the tooling is like much better than it was like 2 to 3 years ago. But if there's like DeFi application, it's a very different nature. It's like building a financial app. But it's still much easier than building a financial app in the chat system because you don't have access to the banking APIs, because you don't have the legal agreements and access to the finance tools that already exist.
Yeah. I'd advocate for many builders to choose simplicity. I feel like some application builders use some infra for the sake of using the infra, motivated by grants, motivated by ecosystem alignment or anything, right? I do think, like every application has different requirements. Some are suitable for public permissionless blockchains. Some have other requirements for certain ecosystem alignment. Some others may not. I think the L1 stack is gaining more and more popularity because of its simplicity, right? Like I do think like sometimes the modular approach can introduce like a lot of, like basically so many combinations that it is almost impossible to optimize, like them all working smoothly together. But yeah, I do think, like just every application has, unique requirements. There are different ways to build on the application, and I do think applications will be the most successful that pick, whatever approach best suits their use case and not motivated by, like grants or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think so many good programmers. So before this company, I had another company, runtime verification, and we started doing formal verification for mission critical software way before blockchain was a thing. And when they transitioned, I'm not a programmer, so when they transitioned to Web3, to blockchain programming, they were very disappointed of the quality of the programming languages. They said, this programming language is crap. Why should I write programs in this language? And that is a problem. I think we should be able, and we will soon, to use any programming languages from the Web 2 world. Why should we invent very particular programming languages for Web 3? Because in the end, all programs do the same thing. They take you from state 1 to state 2 to state 3, right? So we should be able to use, yes, money is embedded in everything, which is a critical aspect. However, many programs in Web 3 are small. And with the advent of AI, I think we'll pretty soon be able to formally verify almost all the programs, or at least to have AI agents that summarize the effect of these programs. And then we look at it and say, okay, that's not what I meant, and help us find bugs and prove them correct.
Yeah, it's not just formally verifying, but also ZK proving them, right? Like you can have a regular program and the AI can create a ZK circuit that matches the semantics of that program, which is also an exciting thing. But as you mentioned, like it's going to be much safer once you can automate the development process with a robustness that is like close enough to a human.
Yeah, I think a good point that says. It's actually regarding the abstraction of the complexity, basically in the stack, and which is a little bit what you guys are mentioning here. So I will combine two of my questions. But like, what do you think is specifically the bottleneck today in the infra for developer to actually get a better DevX? And also, where do you think we should abstract the complexity in the stack? Where, because I know PySquare, for instance, you say any chain, any language, and that's definitely an abstraction, but yeah.
How many hours do we have?
You have 21 minutes and 38 seconds. Go for it.
I'd say that one of the bottleneck we have today is that we have a lot of quote-unquote fake infra, meaning there's a lot of people building infra, right? But a lot of it doesn't have any users, right? So it's production ready, but when you actually go through using those, it doesn't work, or it breaks, or it has some small bugs, right? And I by no means mean that this is not the case in my ecosystem. This is the case everywhere, right? I mean, you have to test things in prod to know that they're ready, right? And I think there's a big bottleneck here. You're like, yes, we have the stack, we can be ready to go live, and then once you go live, look, actually, it's a bit more clunky than it looks. And I think that's one big bottleneck today.
That and also the lack of liquidity. I think all projects, they should first connect to wormhole and then do everything else, right? To bring liquidity or, similar approaches. And that will incentivize people to develop. And then lack of tools, as was mentioned, right? So tools are critical. If you don't have tools, you don't write programs. You want tools to help you test, to help find bugs, to actually for the network and be able to simulate in real time. So there are lots of things that can help.
I think, we have to ask our questions when someone builds a developer, like an application, how many steps do they have to take to get that application, at least to like a minimal state, right? Like that might not be the end state, but like something that works. I think at Ava Labs, we have tried to focus a lot on making that journey a lot easier, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're building on our public permissionless chain or on a layer 1, right? Like, you shouldn't have to run 5 binaries to get a simple chain up and running, and this is I think obviously there are a million different options here, but it should be relatively simple. It shouldn't take you longer than like 15 minutes to get a basic chain up and running. All these things. You shouldn't have to study for 2 years. Like different fields to understand like generally what's going on. And I do think we can do a lot better there in the space overall. Lowering that barrier of entry. We want to bring in, everyone's saying we want to bring in Web 2 developers. Show any Web 2 developer the stacks that we have today, they're going to scream and run out of the room, right? So I do think just like simplifying, thinking really first principles, what do we actually need here? And then, find appropriate setups that are manageable for teams that come into our ecosystem to run actually applications on.
Yeah, so on my end, I guess like one of the biggest improvements of the quality of life of my developer life personally was Foundry, for example. On Ethereum, it was impossible to develop smart contracts and test them in the same language. You have to write tests in JavaScript and then write the program actually in Solidity. So actually being able to just not switch context and just like do everything in Solidity with a minimal CLI that has like really powerful tools was a great improvement. The way that I see it moving forward is that a lot of people are moving towards like this general virtual machine, general purpose virtual machine running arbitrary programs. So we mentioned like normal programming languages. So people are moving to virtual machines like RISC-V or equivalents. So you can write a program in Rust, compile it to RISC-V, and then you'll execute it in a RISC-V VM on the target chain, whichever that may be, especially with like ZK rollups, that you can have more flexibility to build upon. And the toolings there are much more robust. So you can piggyback off of Web2 tools. Because they're sort of for the same virtual machine purpose. So these sort of things would allow you to bring more those kinds of developers into the stage. Another thing that I really like, what is the easiest experience sort of in traditional Web 2 is also like Python, for example, is like one of the good ones. When people have access to like a REPL they can play around with and like prototype with without having to have like a really like bespoke IDE or setup is also like a really nice thing to get like wrap their head around different like things, primitives, etc. Like play around with them. That's something helped me, which is also like part of Foundry. You have like Chisel where you can like execute your study smart contracts. Many people have their own. So these are sort of the things that I see, right? Like just create good abstractions and support like different front ends so that people can build in whatever, but don't break the sort of security or quality of life along the way. It's a hard task, but I think there's many teams doing a good job of that.
Sure. Yeah, to jump in on that one, actually, we can touch upon a bit of what the DevX prioritization it is in your project. So I find that it's always difficult because when you try to build an infra, you want something that's performant and that's great, that is cheap, but you also want something that's easy to use. So how do you prioritize the DevX? Like, what is it in your team? Like an intentional. I won't say a roadmap of DevX, but like, is it like what kind of where do you see the pain point? Like, how can you actually do you talk to the developer? Do you talk to the integrators? Like, how can you improve your product based on feedback from integrators? How do you handle that part to make a DevX much better?
I would say that it depends on what developer target you have, right? If you want to get developers from existing companies or existing projects, people who have experience and want to build something using your chain, right? In that case, what matters, I think, is having very thorough documentation and resources and maybe code examples, because those people can pick things on their own. You don't need to make it too easy for them, you just need to make the information accessible, which is very challenging when the stacks change a lot, like it changes in all of those infrastructure, right? Then if what you're looking for is more younger developers who will build something new and try things out on an ecosystem during a hackathon, then probably you need more easy-to-use onboarding tool. And here I would actually suggest focusing a lot on how your chain is perceived and described by AI, because more and more these are the tools that are being used by these kind of developers. So you want to make sure that their teacher, which is the AI, will know how to talk about your product, present it, and explain how to leverage it.
So for me, it's easy to answer. We just launched our DevNet last week, so we don't know yet. But our goal is to allow developers to use any programming languages. They will need to abstract their state somehow to get a hash of it and settle that. But other than that, they should be able to use their usual developer environment, IDEs, and They can even write programs in Java, and there are lots of tools for Java.
So you're saying that basically your role is not in any way to educate them on anything else than what you...
Exactly. There will be a little bit of education, how to connect their application to the, I don't call it chain because ours is not a chain, it's a set, how to connect it to the set. And then once that happens, then they should be able to use their normal development environment. That's the goal at least. But again, we just launched, so I don't want to make big claims.
Yeah, just as Henry mentioned, like since modern developers, like young developers coming into the space, are mostly using AI tools like Cursor, Windsurf, like Claude Code or OpenAI, like Codex or whatever. Building an MCP server is also very helpful. Like people were talking about Anthropic earlier, but like if you build your own model context protocol that allows you to, for example, interact with your documentation, go back to the IDE, it will tell you like the specific thing the user asked, and then maybe execute the CLI. And you, as long as you keep the MCP up to date and the semantics are done very well, then that's sort of like a great onboarding experience that I've seen many people do, and it's like really great. Other than that, for another thing that is really useful for developers, especially power users, is if your programming language or set of tools is open source, but also the development is open source, meaning that all the changes that are going to happen are part of like GitHub issues and are tracked in the open, because it feels that like those people can actually own the development of your own tools as well as a developer, which is a really nice feeling, which is part of the reason why like the Foundry ecosystem in Ethereum won, as opposed to like other ones like Hardhat, Ethers, etc., was that people could actually contribute and all the development was happening open source, and they were really active on Telegram answering questions. So I feel like these sort of things are really helpful in that context.
Yeah. I actually have a hot take. I do think, especially for onboarding new developers, CLIs, command line interfaces, are one of the worst things that we can do. It's incredibly hard to get into. What we found at Avalanche is that developers spend sometimes weeks learning our CLI, not the actual protocol. And so what we actually move towards is a more, like visually appealing approach, where we now have on our Avalanche Builder Hub tools that help you launch an L1 without ever, like downloading anything on your computer. It's all Docker based. It visually guides you through it. And I do think like CLIs are incredibly hard for people that are just entering our ecosystem, because like the interface is so limited. So we are really pivoting away. I do think it's appropriate for protocols that are rather simple, right? Like where the developer interaction with the CLI is not as much. But in our CLI we had, dialogues with 15 questions where you navigate through with your keys and everything, and it just showed to be a massive burden to enter the ecosystem. And now kind of like we managed to create an experience similar to like a blockchain as a service provider, but for self-hosters. And I do think that's a massive step forward, and can encourage any team just to really check and reevaluate all the tools they have. Is it actually the appropriate way to interact with developers? And especially think about these developers that will interact with it once or twice, and are all learning it. Because CLIs are great if you're incredibly efficient, if you're doing this every day, but like if you're doing the action once or twice in your life cycle, then it's probably not worth doing it through a CLI.
Yeah, it's interesting because actually we have the reverse experience. Because WAML is not a chain, right? So actually when you get into the integration issue and people are not using the CLI, then they spend a lot of time learning the direct core contract integration, which most of the time if you have a regular use case, it's out of the box, you don't need. You could probably just do the CLI, and we are just a tool. Like we are an infra, right? So I think what's interesting here is, again, like how do you get those feedback from your developer? Because if you are actually a chain, you might want them to spend more time understanding your concept, rather than if you're a tool, well, I'm happy they use us. Once they use us, they keep using us. They basically update the version once in a while, but that's pretty much it. You don't maybe need to know. It's basically my question is like, where do you draw the line into like, how much do they need to know about the tool they are using? How much can you, how important it is for the developer to fully understand the tool. I guess if you're a chain, it's very important, but maybe if you're just an infra.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, right? Like, what they're doing, do they need to understand what's going on?
Yeah.
Or is it just like a single time action? There's no
Exactly.
point of them, like deploying 15 contracts manually. This should definitely be automated with a CLI or any other tool, right? I do think there are still some protocols that hide core protocol features behind a CLI, and it leads to the developer being disconnected to the underlying concepts. And that is really, really difficult. And we found, like, for them, they may be able to spin it up, but it's almost impossible for them to maintain it because they do not understand what's going on. So we take a more granular approach that they actually do more, like actions that they actually actively taking instead of just running a single command and then don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, so if you were, this is more like a bit of a, I don't know, it's a more, not personal question, but I think each of you have your own experience. If you were starting your project today, which current development, like whether it's ZK or whatever it is, sorry, I lost the question. Okay, so if you were starting today, what any change that is happening today will actually change the decision that you made at the beginning? Like, knowing the tooling you have today, basically, where was the gap when you started that you wish you had the tool that you built today? Like, is there anything like this that...
I think that's a great question. So I'm not a founder, so I'll talk from my perspective, right, the perspective of Starknet. I think when we started, we underestimated how hard it was to build a good sequencer. I think that's something that a lot of EVM chains get for free because there's a lot of pretty good clients to run EVM chains, right? And that's something we underestimated. We underestimated how hard it would be to actually do a sequencer that scales. And then we went a bit overboard and we invested a lot on the sequencer and we were a bit late on the prover. So it's like try to figure out where your next bottleneck will be before actually reaching it. We're fine now. It's all good. Come build. But it's like this balance is difficult.
I think in our case, actually it's kind of similar. So we put a lot of effort initially on developing the mathematical foundation for everything, making sure that we can get very rigorous mathematical proofs that pass all the checks. Then we get zero-knowledge proofs from the mathematical proofs. That took a lot of time. And we were very happy when the whole thing was done, but then we had to build a network. And I think we should have started backwards, actually. I think we should have simply assumed that we have the proofs for every claim that we want to make. And then start with the network. Let's implement the network. Let's make sure we can settle all those. Because in the process, one thing that we realized is that, let's see, how can I say that nicely? That you don't really need a blockchain to settle claims that come with proofs. Okay, so you can settle them as a set. And that was a conceptual breakthrough that came too late. If we realized it earlier, then we could have advanced things much faster in parallel. That's very important. I think that's one of the trickiest parts. How can you parallelize the work? Because you think that this is needed in order to enable other things. But in fact, if you start the other way around, you can work in parallel several other tracks.
There's this concept of mechanical Turk, right? When you're building a startup, which is essentially you want to build an automated soda dispenser, right? Maybe you don't start with the soda dispenser, you just start with the face of the machine and you put somebody behind who will just give soda cans when people want to buy on the machine. Sounds dumb, but actually it allows you to validate what works in prod before actually spending time investing in the engine. And that's something I think people in Web3 tend to do a lot. We care about the engine, and so we start with the engine instead of trying to figure out like, hey, is this useful and how will people interact with it?
I would say it blindly. This is the academic approach. So we took the academic approach, and we should have taken the engineering approach.
Yeah, I guess for us, there wasn't a specific like technological thing that wasn't available. Maybe besides like L2s being really expensive back in the day. So we spent like probably like $10 million plus like subsidizing transactions. So if like things like EIP 4844 and Ethereum came sooner, or L2s like scaled more, then we wouldn't have had to go through the pain of like subsidizing a lot of those transactions. But otherwise, I think like tool-wise, the only thing that I maybe didn't like working with was Circom, which is a ZK DSL. that is like very bare bones. So like nowadays there's like either like Noir from Aztec or like some other ZKDSs like Cairo, which are really nice. So yeah, like maybe that's those two. Nothing too specific though.
Yeah, I mean, we as a multi-chain network are incredibly excited about interoperability, right? And I do think, like while specific networks like ourselves have figured out native interoperability between chains of the same stack, I'm incredibly excited about just global interoperability. I'm not sure how it will look like. I can see that ZK is going to play a big role in it. I do think, because we all still have the trauma of the bridge hacks in the past, I do think we will see a more conservative approach, possibly combining either different technologies, possibly even with more centralized committees that all have to agree for interoperability to take place. And I do think once we figured that out, we are a massive step further when users can move assets, like without friction, and we really get to this level of chain abstraction where the underlying chain matters much less to the application, and users can, like just freely choose and interoperate across the entire space.
Yeah, no, for sure. The chain abstraction is a big thing coming up. Okay, to wrap it up, one last question, which is more of a wish. What wish do you have for builders in the industry to, let's say, if you could make the best infra DevX possible, like one tool that will solve a massive problem that you have every day, which one would that be? Magic wand.
Yeah, magic one, I would have a tool that makes people wonder when they are building something, hey, does this has value? Who will pay for it? How do I make it a sustainable business? I think that's more than infra, that's what we miss in Web3. Yeah.
I think same thing, right? Like a lot of people are building things just for the sake of building things. Something that I really like about World, and the reason why I joined 3 years ago, was that we were trying to build a product, and then we chose the technology, reverse engineering from the end experience of the product, and you're always building with scale in mind. So like if you were trying to build a product, it's actually appealing to consumers, like regular people that actually want to use a product, and there's something sustainable about it because you're providing value to them. Essentially, like reiterating Henry's points, like if people actually think about the experience they want to provide and reversing from that and choosing the ecosystem they want to be in or the tools they want to use from the thing they want to do and like matches their vision most closely, and making sure that while you're building, like the things still stay true, is probably the best advice I could give for like things I would, if I could wave a wand, like see developers just build things with that in mind.
I think personally I can't wait for the day where the level of the barrier of entry is so low for new applications to enter the ecosystem with their dedicated block space, right? Like with their own chain. Users don't have any UX burdens anymore. They can get all the integrations they need from day one without talking to any ecosystem growth team or BD team. They don't have to pay massive sums. They can just enter the space. They can build similar how it is today. There's plenty of opportunities. There are plenty of services. Everything is very competitive. The barrier of entry is so low. And I do think it would be, when we get to that point where founders and builders can just build stuff without like raising millions of dollars, but we can really grassroots do that, then we will get to a point where we will have more and more apps that are just funded by a much larger builder community.
Yeah. Do you want to add something? You
No.
good? No wish. No, you're happy enough.
No. I think the blockchain abstraction and all programming languages, that's what I would like people to be able to use.
Yeah, no,
They shouldn't
for
see
sure.
different blockchains, different languages, different ecosystems, different silos. Should be same like when you buy a computer, and then you put whatever programming languages you want on it. But if you pick a blockchain, now you have to pick a language as well,
Yeah.
right? And that's ridiculous.
What about you?
Me? If I go too far on chain abstraction, I will be out of jobs. So maybe.
No, but I mean, like, what's your wish list? What is the secret tool you want people to build?
I think I'll say similar. Like the problem is that when you get so many projects, they come and talk to you, and they just have like sometimes I'm like, would you use it yourself? Like, is it something that you're gonna use it on a daily basis? And they're like, yeah, why not? I'm like, oh, wow, so you're building a product that maybe you're going to use. Well, I don't know, man. Like, you should. And also, when you start, what I wish is that when you start using a product in DeFi that is so good and you're so happy with and you would actually recommend it to your mom. Like, that is the moment that you're like, yeah, we should have a product like this. Like, I have encountered it maybe twice in the last 6 months. And I can say I've been in the space for years, and there's not that many products I would recommend to my mom. But I found twice, like, an app that was like, yeah, she can understand that. And so I'm really hopeful that we get closer and closer and closer. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
All right, we out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.